Today's story is Trapped by a Tiger. At the outset, let me make it clear to the reader that I am no hero, either in fiction or in reality. I have never used a gun in my life, except on shooting range at school where I usually missed the target by several feet. Although I grew up in an age when hunting wild animals was a pastime that was supposed to prove one's manhood, I developed an early aversion to the so-called sport of kings. If my cousins and their friends called me a coward, I wasn't really bothered. The extent of their bravery seemed to depend largely on the size of the guns they held. All the same, at age 12, I was persuaded by one of my uncles to accompany him and his friends on a weekend's shikar in the forests near Dehra, a small North Indian town where my grandparents had settled. These forests were then fairly well populated by the tigers, the other big cats, wild elephants, and various species of deer. They set up their headquarters at the small forest rest house in the heart of the jungle, and from here the hunters set out early every morning, often on elephants, returning late in the afternoon, well in time for the evening's whiskey soda. To avoid boredom, I had bought a couple of books along. The hunters did not press me to join them on their forays into the jungle, and I was grateful to them for that. I was left with sandwiches and a thermos of tea and told not to spray from the rest house. The caretaker, a retired forest guard, lived in a hut at the other end of the clearing, and I was to call out to him if I needed anything. It was perfectly safe here, said Uncle Jim. Just don't venture into the forests on your own. I was quite happy to see the hunting party march off into the jungle. They would be met by the elephants at another halt. I settled into an armchair on the veranda, read a little, ate a sandwich, kept one for later, and then, feeling drowsy in the hot April sunshine, dozed off. I must have slept for 10 or 15 minutes. When I woke up, there was a strong smell of animal in the air. I did not have a look far to see where it came from. Standing in the middle of the clearing, some 30 or 40 meters away and looking directly at me, was a massive tiger. A monstrous tiger, I should say, because that was how it appeared to a 12-year-old. I knew I wasn't dreaming because I could hear my heart thumping very loudly. The tiger was silent. It was watching me. Speculatively, perhaps? Certainly with interest, but not out of any feelings of friendliness. It had just been driven out of the forest by a bunch of noisy shikaris, and it did not like the look of me. Or perhaps it did like the look of me. Brunch, if not lunch. Hadn't there been rumors of a man-eater terrorizing the villagers in the next district? I got out of my chair very quietly, dashed into the living room, shut the front door and bolted it. I then went to the nearest window and peered out. The tiger had advanced a few paces. Raising its head, it sniffed at the air. It was obviously in charge of the situation. Where was the forest guard? Where were Uncle Jim and his great hunters? Never before had I felt so alone and so abandoned. When I realized that I was staring out of an open window, I shut it quickly. It wasn't a very large window, not big enough for a tiger to get through, but I remembered that there were other large windows in the building, and the tiger had turned away from the veranda and was beginning to circle the house. Although confused and panic-stricken, I remembered that the back door of the bathroom had been left open. I left the living room and dashed into one of the bedrooms. There were two, tumbled into the bathroom and shut the door with a bang. The noise must have startled the tiger because he let out an angry yowl. You know the kind of sound a hungry tiger makes? You hear it often enough when you visit the zoo. Was the other bathroom door shut? I raced across to the second bedroom. There was a communicating door and into the bathroom. The back door was shut, bolted. I was trembling, almost crying with relief. But how many doors and windows did that crazy bungalow have? Back in the bedroom, I sat down on a bed and tried to pull myself together. When I looked around, I noticed that the bedroom window was half open, and it was a fairly large window without bars. I crept up to it and peeped over the sill. Tiger was in the backyard, much closer to the house. I could smell it. Its odor came to me on the breeze in horrid foul gusts. A sickening odor. Its odor came to me on the breeze in horrid foul gusts. A sickening odor. And one I shall never forget. Softly, I closed the window and bolted it. This window had 4 panes of glass, supported by wooden frames. I was sure the tiger could smash through it, but when I looked out, I couldn't see the beast. Perhaps it had moved on, seen something else, or returned to the forest. I think I am safe now. I remember saying this to myself as I returned to the living room. Just then there was a heavy thump on the front door, followed by an angry snarl. I could hear the beast's claws rasping against the wooden door. I leapt to the barred window and put my face to the glass and was just able to see a portion of the terrible creature as it examined and tested the door of the bungalow. I was at my wits' end, shaking all over. But I had to do something. High up on the living room was a small skylight opening onto the roof. If I could get to it, I could climb to the roof. I would be safe there. I pulled the dining table across the room. Then I placed a smaller table on the top of it. I heaved a cane chair onto the edifice and climbed up on the wobbling chair. Meanwhile, the tiger was making an awful din, thrusting against the door with all its weight and tearing at the wood with its powerful claws. I got the skylight open and climbed through. I was out on the flat roof of the bungalow, a good 30 feet above the ground level. At the same time, there was a tremendous crash as the door gave away. The tiger was in the living room. I looked down through the open skylight and it circled the small room, lashing its tail and knocking over the tables and chairs. It stood up with its paws against the wall and stared up at the skylight. Its upper lip was raised, exposing enormous fangs. Its eyes appeared to be glaring into mine. But in that confined space, it could not maneuver itself into a position to make it big enough leap for the skylight. In its rage and frustration, it turned its attention to my thermos flask, a bit right through it. And then, in disgust, it charged out of the living room and emerged once more into the clearing. I watched it from the roof as it let out a roar, such a roar of rage that all the birds flew out of the trees, crying out in alarm. At the same time, there was the sound of a gun being fired, and the forest guard emerged from behind his hutment, reloading as he advanced. The tiger, who knew all about guns, turned away from the bungalow and went bounding away towards the shelter of the jungle. The guard fired again, but the tiger was well out of the range by then. "Oh, are you all right, Baba?" asked the guard as he helped me down from the roof. I think so, I said, but the tiger was really after me. It's new to our range, he said. It could be the man-eater we have heard about. I will sit here on the veranda until the others are back. An hour or two later, the hunters returned, a weary bunch. They hadn't shot anything except for a few pheasants. They looked rather foolish when they heard about the tiger's visit and saw the damage it had done. I didn't say much because I was still in shock. Uncle Jim was glad to find me alive but worried at what my grandparents would say when they heard about the incident. "You won't tell them, will you?" he begged. "Your granny will never forgive me if she learns that I left you here on your own." "Next time you should keep a gun with you," advised one of his companions. "But I have managed quite well without a gun all these years." It was some time before I could mention this incident to anyone, partly because of my promise to Uncle Jim and partly because it took me some time to get over it.